The dangers of carbon monoxide are real. It's why we have audible CO alarms in our homes. But general aviation has been slow to catch up until recently. Now, audible CO detectors can warn an aviator of the presence of this silent killer. Today, a pilot shares how CO poisoning almost cost him his life on a very cold winter night. It's one of two engine-out landing stories he'll share, one conscious and the other out cold, on this episode of The Rider Report. Hello everyone, I'm Rob Ryder, and welcome to episode 13 of AvBrief's Rider Report podcast, brought to you by Avemco Insurance. Flight instructor Dan Bass joins me today to tell his story of how carbon monoxide poisoning affected him and how he miraculously survived a crash landing that he wasn't aware had happened. He was out cold, literally. He'll also talk about how he handled an engine failure at 14,500 feet and what he did right and wrong as he guided his plane to a safe landing, dead stick. It's coming up right after this message from Avemco. Not all aircraft insurance policies and companies are the same. Avemco Insurance Company never works with third-party insurance agents or brokers and believes you're better off going right to the source instead of through a middleman. We connect you with an aviation underwriter ready to answer your questions and personalize coverage based on what you fly and how you fly it. So unless you reach out to them yourself, you'll never experience the Avemco advantage of going direct. Rider Report listeners save 5% and are eligible for even more savings through the Avemco Safety Rewards Program. Call 800-353-9089 for a free quote or visit avemco.com/Rider Report today. Premium credits are subject to underwriting guidelines, including Avemco-recognized training and memberships. Now, the Rider Report. My guest on the program today is a gentleman that I met on the other podcast a couple of years back, and he had a story that was so amazing in its teaching, and the outcome of its story that could have been deadly ended up being something that became a life giver for many in the lessons that it taught very many of us. His name is Dan Bass, and he's back to talk about Moonies with us today. Dan, welcome to the Rider Report.
Thanks, Rob. It's great to be here.
Before we get into the stories, I know that there are a lot of people who may not have heard that other podcast, and we're going to do a little review of that. But tell me how you got involved in flying, and maybe even specifically with Moonies, because I know you're a Moonie guy.
Sure. Yeah. It turns out I'm a big Moonie guy now. I got into flying when I was a kid. My dad flew when I was, he got us private about the time I was one and a half years old, something like that. And he was a Beechcraft guy, had a Beechcraft Musketeer, then a Beechcraft Sierra later. And then for a while he had a V-35 too.
Nice.
And so I grew up flying with my father, riding in the right seat, always wanting to fly. And then that progressed into when I turned 15. I went out to the airport and started my flight training. I soloed right on my 16th birthday.
Yes.
It was great in a Cessna 150. And then on my 17th birthday, I got my private. So I kind of rushed through it quick and at least got my private by my 17th. And then
that means that you spent a lot of time sitting on phone books in the right seat in your dad's airplanes.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. It was kind of fun. Learning to fly. I kind of credit my dad as teaching me, but he wasn't an instructor and he didn't actually teach me. But it started off where maybe a couple of years, probably when I was 8 years old or younger, where he would just say, hey, you see that silo up there? Steer towards that, and I would steer towards that. And then you see that, steer towards that. And after about 2 years, he said, now this over here is an altimeter. And then he said, try to keep it within 100 feet. And then I had 2 more years of just flying towards the silo, but maintaining altitude. So I had about 4 years of straight and level practice before I went into anything else.
I have the same story in my uncle's airplane with his pilot. It was a Cessna 310, but he said, steered toward that whatever, silo, water tower, whatever. The same thing. And I was probably 12 or 13 years old and could not have been more excited in my life. So no wonder you got your private on your 17th birthday.
Yeah, I was hooked. And I know it's not for everybody. My two older brothers never went that route, and they had the same experience as I did. But aviation is everything.
Oh, that's great. Well, you got your ratings. Did you go multi and in flight instructor and all of that, right?
Close. I went through my CFI, I think by the time I was 21 or 22. I didn't get my multi-rating until just a few years ago. And so I've been flying a twin Comanche the last 2 years, and that's been a lot of fun.
That's a solid airplane, isn't it?
It is a good airplane. Being outside the multi-world, I always thought that was kind of the bad one. I thought it was underpowered and it was going to kill you in a VMC roll. But when you fly them properly, they are underpowered a little bit, but when both engines are running, they perform really well.
So there is a speed at which it will still climb single engine?
If you're light, they'll perform great. If you're at gross, it's the second engine's just getting you to the scene, the scene of the crash. But
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, let's back up into single engine Mooney days, because your story that you told me before has to do with carbon monoxide and the insidious nature of its effects on the body. Tell us a little bit about what happened on that incident and how it all turned out. Obviously, you survived, but it was a deadly situation, was it not?
Absolutely. I was very, very fortunate to make it through this one. It goes back, it's almost 9 years ago from now. And I had a business trip where I was going to fly from Winona, Minnesota, southeastern Minnesota, up to Thunder Bay, Canada. And I had a 1969 M20C Mooney. So I always tell people it's the slow Mooney, it's the slowest of the Moonies. And I had to meet with a customer up in Thunder Bay, and they were being really kind to me, and they wanted me to come up, but I told them I was a pilot and I would love to be able to fly up so I don't have to do a hotel. And so they kind of let me look for weather over the next few weeks to pick the right day. And this was in January. So as the next couple weeks go by, there was a high pressure system moving in at the beginning of February. And it looked like a good time to go. So I called and made arrangements and decided to head up for the day. So I took off out of Winona at about 6:30 in the morning. And then in the climb, it was incredibly cold. So this high pressure system had beautiful clear skies, but real cold temperatures. So I was climbing up and I had the airplane preheating overnight. And I caught something in my eye. And I remember rubbing my eye and saying, I wonder if this could be carbon monoxide. And I turned the heater off and turned the vent on, and then I got cold really quick because it was, minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit in the outside air at that point. And I thought to myself, like, this has nothing to do with carbon monoxide. This isn't a symptom. And then I turned the heat back on and shut it off, and whatever was in my eye, I got clear, and I started feeling better, and I continued on with the day. Now, that was the last time I thought about carbon monoxide that day. The next little thing I had was I was at a cruise altitude of, I believe I was at 10,000 feet. I was IFR. I filed IFR for the flight plan to Thunder Bay, even though it was VMC the whole way. But I was at 10,000 feet and I put my pulse oximeter on. And I don't remember the reading, but I remember the reading being several points higher than what I expected it to be. And I thought, oh, I'm doing great. I got full oxygen saturation, no problems. And I continued the trip then and flew up to Thunder Bay. About 10 minutes out of Thunder Bay, I started to get a headache, real slight headache.
On the way into Thunder Bay? On
the way in, I started to get a slight headache. And it's
lower altitude.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I'd started the descent or not, but like I said, I know it was about 10 minutes before I landed. So I probably would have been starting the descent. And I got the slight headache, and I noticed Well, I right away thought, well, I haven't had any caffeine yet this morning, and I drink a ton of coffee. And if I don't have my caffeine, I'll get a headache. Um, so I assumed it was a headache from lack of caffeine. Uh, got into Thunder Bay. I landed and shut down, and I called the Canadian Customs because I'd arranged all that the day before. I talked to the Canadian Customs and I filed my EAPIS with the U.S. and I arranged everything so I could get through customs without a hitch, right? And I landed, called customs. I told them when I landed, and I told them the time, and I believe I said 9:15. And he goes, "Wait, when did you land?" And I said, just a few minutes ago, 9:15. And he kind of sounded confused, and he gave me a clearance number to write down. And then I was cleared in. I got out of the airplane and sprinted into the FBO to stay out of the cold. And once I got into the FBO, that's when I realized that Thunder Bay was on Eastern time zone, not Central like the rest of the U.S. So the Canadian Customs was confused because I told them I just landed at 9:15, and he saw it as 10:15. So I was actually an hour late, and I made that mistake.
Oh boy.
But when that happened, I had this terrible anxiety feeling. And I explain it as anxiety because that's what I attributed it to, but it didn't feel like anxiety, and I don't normally have anxiety. But that's what I thought it was. It was like a butterflies in the chest.
Wow.
And at that point, I literally thought Canadian Customs was going to show up and lights flashing and I was going to be arrested or something. I had no idea. But I got that squared away, and I went to try to meet with my customer, and I was late to see them because I thought I was on Central Time, and they had changed their schedule around. So they said, "Can you come back after lunch?" So I left and went to lunch, got some coffee, and that headache that was kind of lingering all morning started to go away. So I had my meetings with my customers. Then I went back to the airport. Now, of course, I'm delayed several hours past when I expected.
This is what time then in the afternoon that you're ready to head back?
I think it's probably about 4:00 when I got back to the Thunder Bay airport.
Which means even at 4:00 in January, at that latitude, you're losing daylight quickly.
Yeah, and that didn't concern me much. It would have now, but back then I was a little more willing to take risks. I trusted my airplane, and I didn't think there would be a problem. But I was hoping to get back, and I called the U.S. Customs to meet me in Duluth, and I arranged the arrival time, and I went to try to start my airplane, and I had been plugged in. I had a Tanis heater, and I had that plugged in all day, but the engine just wouldn't fire, and because it was so cold out that the fuel couldn't atomize in the induction tubes, and I just couldn't get it to fire. So I had to get out of the plane, call Customs back, and tell them I need to get a preheat, so I'll be another hour late. And then I got a preheat to come and blow hot air in the engine for a half an hour or whatever it was, and got the airplane started and then took off. So now it's even later in the day, and I started flying into Duluth just as the sun was going down. So I landed and I taxied up, and the second I got out of the airplane, now up until this point, I'd felt fine. But the second I got out of the airplane and stood up on the wing, I got a splitting headache. It was like someone punched me. It hit so hard, so fast. Excuse me. And so now I've got the headache back. I had that anxiety feeling, and both of these I was able to kind of explain away with events of the day. But this headache, I really wasn't able to explain away, but it didn't happen in the airplane. It happened outside the airplane. So I wasn't making the connection. But the customs agent comes out and he runs around the airplane really quick because it was so cold. And we ran inside and finished the paperwork there. Then I called my wife and told her I'll be home in just a little over an hour. And I basically sprinted back to the airplane to start it before it would cool off too much. Because I think the outside air temps at this point were about 10 below zero Fahrenheit.
Oh boy.
So it was cold. And now at this point, it's night, right? So by the time I started the engine, it's 6:00 and it's dark out. I filed my IFR flight plan with my iPad through Garmin Pilot, and I would get a text message that said it was in the system. So before I got the text message, I knew I couldn't get my clearance from the tower. So I was just started the engine, and then I tidied up the cockpit and prepared myself for the night flight. In a previous incident, if you want to call it not an incident, but I had an electrical failure once at night. And ever since then, I always wore a headlamp whenever I fly at night. So I put my headlamp on and I tidied up the cockpit. I had my hat, my gloves in the seat next to me, and my iPad was mounted on the yoke, and I had prepared the flights at the radios, did everything I could do. Then I got that message saying that the IFR flight plan was in the system, and I called the tower and got my clearance to come back home to Winona. At this point, they cleared me to taxi out to runway 27, if I remember right. And on the taxi out, I still had this splitting headache, and I had this anxiety feeling hit really hard. The same feeling I had in the morning, but now I had it while I was taxiing out. But it only lasted about 20 seconds. And when I got to the run-up area, that anxiety feeling was gone and the headache was gone. And all of a sudden, I was sitting there feeling fine. And I do kind of remember thinking, the other thing was my 4.5-year-old daughter was sick that week. So then I started taking the symptoms and saying, you know what, I got what Lila has. So I was thinking I was just getting sick. And I remember in the run-up area thinking, well, I'd rather be sick at home than sick here. So I'm going to it's only an hour flight and I'll go home and, push through. So a little bit of get-home-itis was involved in this too.
Sure. Oh, gosh.
And then when I did my run-up, I would do my run-up typically as a flow check. And then I would get the checklist out and just check that I did everything. So I did the flow, and then I got the checklist out, and I ran through the checklist over and over and over again. And I didn't actually ask the tower for departure. I sat there so long, they called me and asked if I was ready. And I said, well, I will be. And then I still didn't call them back. And then they called me about a minute later and just cleared me for departure. And I was in a state of mind where I was confused. I kind of knew something was wrong maybe, but I couldn't figure out what. And I was in a state of mind where if the tower said, hey, why don't you shut your airplane down there, get out and walk to the tower, and then we'll go out to eat, I would have said, oh, okay. And I would have shut down and just walked off. I was very suggestible. So when he cleared me for takeoff, I was kind of thinking, well, this is what I'm doing next. And I wasn't really in charge of my of my actions, if that makes sense.
Dan, it seems to me that you were beyond the point of discerning that carbon monoxide poisoning was the cause of these symptoms.
So I took off. When I put the landing gear up, which I do real low, I was probably 100 feet off the ground, that anxiety feeling came flashing back. And I remember turning to the heading they told me to, and some traffic call outs. And every radio transmission, I got a little bit further away, and I started slurring a little bit. And the last one was they cleared me direct to Winona and up to 9,000 feet. I repeated that back, and like muscle memory in that airplane, I had a Garmin 530, and I had the flight plan in, and I was flying a heading away from the flight plan. So I went direct to Winona, and I hit enter, because you hit enter twice to get it to activate. Mm-hmm. And then muscle memory, I reach over and I push my GPS steer button. I have the S-Tech GPS steer system, so it's toggle between heading and GPS steer. So I was on heading and I pushed that, or I would normally push that, and then the airplane would turn and follow the new direct track to Winona. But I didn't push that button. And it's a miracle that I didn't, because like I say, it was muscle memory. Every time I do it direct enter, I would just push that button. And I didn't push the button. And the very next thing I know after doing that, I was waking up. And I started keying the mic to tell ATC I fell asleep, but I'm okay. I need to go land. And as I'm doing that and not getting any responses, I'm sitting in the plane and I'm looking at this beautiful windshield in front of me, just clear as day. And I was very pleased. I was like, man, my window was so clear for once. And then I reached forward to touch it and it wasn't there. And so that's when I started to realize that I wasn't flying and I was actually on the ground.
You had crashed
Yes.
and survived the crash. It was controlled flight into terrain?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. The airplane flew for about an hour and a half with me asleep, basically, and ran out of gas in the selected tank, and for 10 minutes descended under that trimmed airspeed. And that's kind of what saved me. Was I lost consciousness in the climb, so I had a trimmed airspeed of 105 knots or 120 miles an hour. That was sort of the cruise climb I would use in that airplane. And so the airplane ascended at 105 knots. It leveled off at about 105 knots when the engine couldn't produce more power, up at about 12,500 feet. And then when it ran out of gas, it came down at 105 knots.
How badly injured were you?
I was pretty banged up. I had 3 broken vertebrae. I knocked out a couple teeth and broke my upper jaw. And I had a puncture wound in my right knee, and some, I'm guessing some, they never talked about it, but a combination of the impact and the CO, I had some concussion too.
You must have been very, very confused about what was going on. You must have been in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
What happened next?
There was a lot of things happening. Me trying to get out of the airplane, feet were stuck, get unstuck. I tried to find my phone. I found my phone, but it had an error message, and I threw that away. And then I found my iPad, and I thought, it's kind of funny because my iPad was still working. And I grabbed it, and I just thought, am I in Iowa or Minnesota? Because I knew I was flying south. And I looked at it, I'm like, oh, I'm in Minnesota. And then I just threw it down. And if I would have had my wits about me, I could have used that as a signaling device. And I didn't think of that. But I got out of the airplane, struggled, fell, crawled, struggled, and then finally gave up and was laying in the snow. And was looking at the beautiful stars. And at this point, I started to get comfortable. It was very cold, so I was frostbit. But I started to get warm, and I just kind of started to relax. And I was looking straight above me, and I was looking at the stars, and the Pleiades star cluster was right over me. And 3 years before, almost to the day, my wife was pregnant, and at midnight, I'm taking her out to the car, trying to get her in the car to take her to the hospital. And she said, we don't have a name for this little girl. And I looked up, and I saw Pleiades above us. And in the Pleiades star cluster, it's the 7 sisters. And the eldest sister of, this is all Greek or Roman mythology.
Oh my gosh.
The eldest sister's name was Maya. So I looked up and I said, we can name her Maya. There's Pleiades. Maya's right there. And so that's what we named my daughter. Well, up until this point, before I was laying in this field, I didn't know who I was. I didn't think about who I was. So as I'm sitting there, that popped into my head, the memory of putting my wife in the car to go to the hospital to have our baby. And it flashed me back into my life. So I knew I was a dad and a husband and friends and family. And all of a sudden, that became clear to me.
You then got the will to live.
Yeah. And it was really a refreshing moment. It was kind of my favorite. It sounds funny to say a favorite part of that crash, but my favorite part of that crash was that moment because it was the only time in my adult life that I've only had one thing to do.
Dan, that is an incredible survival story. Let's move on now to the next one. Not a physiological issue, but a mechanical issue, also in a Mooney.
Yeah, this one was just a little bit different. Well, it was a mechanical failure, we'll say. So after my accident, I was looking for a new airplane. I was still, had a back brace on, and I was shopping for an airplane, and I decided to go back to the Mooney world. And because I just, that accident caused me to fall in love with Moonies. And I decided I wanted to upgrade from the C a little bit. So I started looking for either a J or a K Mooney. And those that aren't familiar, the J is the basically normal aspirated mid-body Mooney, and the K is the turbocharged mid-body Mooney. And I landed on a K, and I found a K out in Pennsylvania that hadn't flown a lot in the last 20 years. Very, very minimal flying. I want to say in the last 20 years it had put on like 20 or 25 hours is all.
Wow.
And so I knew it was going to be a little bit of a diamond in the rough and take some work to get it back to where it needed to be. So I got this airplane and flew it back to Minnesota. I had 600 hours on the engine, so I thought hopefully the engine's going to be okay. And I started off by, I flew it back and basically changed oil. Then I flew it another 15 hours, changed oil, looked at the filter. I was sending oil samples off to Blackstone, getting reports, and progressing on like this, being very conservative and careful. And I put maybe, I don't even remember now, but I think maybe 75 hours on the airplane. And it seemed to be working really well. Everything was running good. Now, I had another customer up in northern Minnesota that I was going to go visit, and I hadn't flown my airplane for business since my accident flight. So I had the C that was destroyed, and then now I have this K, and the next time I'm flying for business was with this K. So the first scheduled trip I had to go up there, the day before I was flying it, and when I come to shut down, I always do a mag check. When I go to shut down, I did a mag check and I lost the left mag. So I had to delay. So I had to delay that trip. So it took a week for me to get the mags sorted and fixed, and then I was going to be off to visit this customer the following week. It was a summer flight, so that was good. It was I think it was probably in June. I don't even know when it was, but it was summer.
Temperatures are in your favor and daylight is in your favor.
Absolutely. It was a beautiful day to fly. And I flew VFR this particular day, but I went up high because I had the turbocharger, and that's why us turbo guys like to go up high. So I was at 14,500 feet in cruise, had a bit of a headwind. I had maybe 25 knots on the nose. But I was heading up there and everything was going great. Because of my accident before, I've gotten really careful about flying, and I've told people that flying kind of lost some innocence for me after that accident, which is a good thing because it's sharpened me a little bit to look at, and mitigate risk more than I would have. So, but as I fly in cross countries now, I use ForeFlight, and I have the glide ring set up for the airplane I'm flying, and I watch it, and I'm always trying to pick out which airport I'm going to go and where is it from me. And I'm always trying to make that plan. And I was doing that, and I'm flying along, and I'm going over Park Rapids, Minnesota. Or I was actually northwest of it, but I had my head down looking at my iPad saying, okay, Park Rapids is still my go-to airport. It's behind me to the right. And I forget the airport that was ahead up to the left, but I said, they're going to be my next airport in about 2 minutes. And I was watching it. And right then I heard 3 little popping noises, just a quick pop, pop, pop. And I had no idea what it was. And I remember grabbing my seat adjuster, sliding my seat forward, and then looked at the engine monitor and saw that my number 4 cylinder was gone. There was no CHD or EGT. It was just gone. But the engine was smooth. And so my memory is all sorts of troubleshooting and what I was doing. But when I re-looked at the flight track on Google Earth or from ForeFlight, I did everything almost instantaneous. And the first thing I did was I initiated a right turn to go towards Park Rapids. So I turned and I ended up with a tailwind, and I still have power. The airplane's still running smooth. It seemed like it was fine. But based it on...
Did you notice a drop in the RPM with all of that as well?
No, not yet.
Wow.
But I made that turn, and then I called ATC because I was talking to them, and I just told them I'm diverting to Park Rapids. I said I lost a cylinder. And they said, do you want to declare an emergency? And I said, no, everything's running fine. And I was up high, and I'm like, it won't be a problem. And at that time, they had a radar outage up in northern Minnesota. So they only had radar coverage to about 10,000 feet. And I was above that. So I got over Park Rapids easy. I was 16 and a half miles away when I started the turn, and I still got over Park Rapids above 10,000 feet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So performance of the engine was obviously not as bad as one might seem. In a normally aspirated engine, losing a cylinder could be pretty serious, and for some reason the turbo kept you in good
Well,
stead.
I think the turbo, and it's a 6-cylinder engine, so it's just one six,
Okay.
so it's not like a 4-cylinder.
That's right, one of 6. Okay.
And there probably was some power loss, and I just didn't notice it. But the tailwind really helped. I remember turning and not caring about glide speed because of my altitude. And I had a ground speed of like 225 knots or something, going back towards Park Rapids. But so ATC tells me they're going to lose me on radar, asked if I wanted to declare, and I said no. And as I descended around below 10,000 feet, they said, you can switch. We lost you on radar. You can switch to advisory. But they said, we're going to give you a phone number. We want you to call us when you're on the ground. So I did have that at least. So I wrote the phone number down. I switched frequencies, and then almost immediately there was a loud bang, and there was smoke and smells and shaking and just everything let loose. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. But
oh my.
I initially thought when I made that turn, I was heading to Park Rapids. I have a cold cylinder, but it's smooth. And I'm familiar with how engines work. So I thought I blew a spark plug out. And I lost compression, and it's cold, but that's why it's smooth. And part of me, this is that get-home-itis nonsense, I even thought, on 5 cylinders, I could probably fly back to Winona. I'm only 220 miles away.
Oh, jeez.
But then I said, no, I just got to land and figure it out. So then when this shaking happens, there's a bang and shaking and smoke and all that, I assume that the cylinder broke off at the case. I assume I lost the case, or because you see that a lot where you'll have a cylinder let go. And I thought to myself, that broke the fuel line going to the cylinder. Whatever power I can squeak out of this thing, I'm also squirting fuel into a cowling that has a turbo in it. So I just pulled the mixture. That's pretty much all the troubleshooting I did. I pulled the mixture. The prop continued to windmill, but it's smoothed out tremendously. So the engine's off, it's windmilling, and it's manageable.
You're in essence dead stick at this point.
So I started circling down, and I was trying to plan to set up for a downwind of 1,500 feet AGL or so. Give me a little bit of room. So I was trying to change the diameter of my turning to make sure I could get situated at a high key, so I could come in and land. Sure. And once I got there, and I'm like, okay, I've got the field made. This is easy. I'm going to put the mixture back in and see what I get. And I put it in, and it started shaking and firing. It was terrible. So I pulled it out again quick. And then my brain, because I'm a Mooney owner, which means I'm a little bit thrifty, if that's a safe way of saying being cheap. I was thinking, man, this is going to cost me a fortune to rebuild this motor. And I was on kind of a high base, and I didn't put my gear down yet. And I went over to grab my gear lever, and I thought to myself, if I leave this gear up, the insurance company is going to cover some of this.
No. Are you serious? You really did think that?
I did. And fortunately, my dad passed away years before, but he literally appeared to me in the seat next to me, said, "Put the gear down." we don't do that. I'm like, okay, you're right. So my dad was still being a parent, right? Okay. And so I put the gear down, and I made the runway, and was able to. I didn't quite have the energy. I wasn't as good as Bob Hoover or anybody. I didn't roll up to the ramp, but I was
and get out and doff your cap and take a bow. Right.
It didn't quite.
He was the greatest.
He certainly was. But I ended up rolling out, and I was half on the runway, half on the taxiway, right on the edge of the runway. So I didn't clear the runway, and I called on the radio, Park Rapids traffic, Mooney such and such. Well, I'm going to back up for a second. From when I made the frequency change to the landing, I made 3 engine out radio calls saying, Mooney with an engine out at 7,000 or whatever it was at. And then I did downwind and I did on base or whatever, engine out, I had an engine failure. I made it clear that it was a bit of an emergency, right? And I come in and land, get off the runway, or half off the runway, and I make a call on the frequency asking if anyone's around. Can anyone hear me? And I had a response from a Cherokee, and he said, I can hear you 5x5, what's up? And I said, well, I just had an engine failure, and I'm down here on the other end of the runway, kind of stuck. I was wondering if someone's here that can give me a tow into the ramp. And he just said, I don't know if anyone's around. And then he made his radio call and said he was departing the runway I just landed on. So he didn't care at all that I had an engine failure. And if anyone's listening to this, please help everybody when they need help like that. Because I've helped people too, where I haven't been home. I got home 4 hours late because I was helping someone with an airplane problem. It's just the right thing to do. But
yeah. Well, tell you what. Well, then, so you got it fixed.
Well, yeah. So I had to walk into the ramp and get them out and tow it in, and they removed the engine, and I ended up overhauling it, and it took, I think, 10 months of downtime before I got the airplane out of there.
It's a bummer that it took so long. Dan, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll do a debrief on both stories, and you can share your lessons learned. Without the right insurance, you're Sierra Oscar Lima. Avemco Insurance Company is the only direct writer in the market and never uses third-party agents or brokers. Instead, they connect you directly with an aviation underwriter in their Frederick, Maryland office, ready to solve problems and approve coverage based on your flying. Floats to wheels and back to floats, Avemco gives you more flexibility. Call 800-353-9089 for a free quote or visit avemco.com/rider report today. Don't forget to tell them the Rider Report sent you for 5% off your premium. Premium credits are subject to underwriting guidelines, including Avemco recognized training and memberships. Now, back to the Rider Report. We're back with Dan Bass with two incredible stories, one of which I had heard most of before, and then the problem with the engine out. Dan, let's go one at a time. Let's go back to the carbon monoxide scenario and those symptoms that taught you some important lessons about how insidious that is. What did you learn from all of that?
Well, being a flight instructor, I would teach carbon monoxide as we were taught through the FAA. And one of the things they're kind of misguided on is the way I always read it was it sounded like the symptoms were going to be linear. You're going to start to get a headache, and that headache will continually get worse. And then you will start to get these other symptoms, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And what I learned with my experience was that the symptoms, they're just like hypoxia. In fact, it's half hypoxia, because you're getting hypoxic because you don't have oxygen, but you also have the carbon monoxide.
That is poisoning you at that point.
That's poisoning you, yeah. And so the symptoms aren't linear, and they're going to be different for everybody. So my experience would be different than your experience, Rob. And that was kind of a wake-up call. And then one of the things that isn't in any documentation really is that the biggest symptom is your cognitive decline. And that happens before you even start to get a headache. And I suppose they don't list that as a symptom because personally, we can't recognize our own cognitive decline usually. But that is another symptom. When you're starting to get confused or things aren't making sense, you're already getting poisoned by carbon monoxide poisoning. So it showed me how critical it was that we keep it out of our cockpits the best we can at all times. And the best way to do that is with a carbon monoxide detector.
And that's not one of those little dots.
Not one of the dots. Yeah. The NTSB told me just jokingly, they're like, well, we like those dots because then we know why the person died.
My
goodness. They just said the problem with the dot is it requires a lot of cognitive ability to see it and interpret it. And by the time it changes color, your cognitive ability is already declined because of the CO that you can't really figure out what's going on.
Wow.
But the high resolution carbon monoxide detectors, and since my accident even, there's been so many more to the market. There's so many out there, and they're so inexpensive. Everybody should have one. I try to discourage people from using the home detectors because they're under a UL listing that to avoid false positives always going off in your house. They alarm at higher levels than the personal, or the high level, or low level, I guess you'd call it, the low level detectors that are available.
Gotcha.
But we've got everything from headsets. Lightspeed makes a headset. We've got Guardian panel mount units, ITHRA panel mount units. Garmin has one now too that they can put and integrate with the G3X. So there's so many out there.
Certainly the Sentry has his CO detector in the newer versions of that.
That's right. Sentry does. And then there's loads of portables that are out there that work as well.
But they make an audible noise if it senses it, so it can at least get your attention. There is another part, though, of this insidious nature that probably has a lot of people thinking, okay, you stop the airplane, you get out, you take a breath of fresh air, and you're going to get better quickly. Not so?
Absolutely, yeah. Not so at all. So the half-life, and that's how long it takes to half itself in your system. So if you have a 20% carboxyhemoglobin in your blood, after 5 to 8 hours in normal atmospheric conditions, it'll come down to 10%. So it takes a full 8. It could take up to a full 8 hours to get out of your system when you're in a normal atmospheric conditions down low. So if you're up high, that half-life is even longer. And then for an accident like mine, I was exposed for 2.5 hours, and then I had a 5-6 hour break, and then I was exposed for an hour, and then I had maybe an hour break or half an hour break, and then it hit me because it ratcheted my levels up. So they came up and then they came down throughout the day, and then they came up even further and down a little bit, never getting me back to zero.
That is a frightening thing. When you first told me about that on the other podcast, that I really thought that there would be a situation like I was in a Piper Cub once that had a little bit of a fuel leak, and I started to feel a little nauseous, and we got down on the ground and I got out of the airplane. I was fine, but CO is a different animal.
Right. And that's what's interesting. It's similar to hypoxia because it's a lack of oxygen, which is the main problem for us. And the difference is, though, hypoxia can be cured instantly with oxygen. Mm-hmm. Like if you're hypoxic and you put the cannula on, in 30 seconds, you're going to be fine. But with CO, that isn't the case.
Yeah. All right, let's move on now to the situation where one of 6 cylinders stopped working, and then everything stopped working, and you started having financial discussions in your mind rather than life-saving decisions in your mind. What happened? What did you learn about on that when the other Mooney engine blew up?
Well, a couple things. I did some things right and I did some things wrong. One of the things I did right was I flew directly to the airport immediately. And when I mean directly to, what I try to teach people in engine out situations, if you can get over the field you want to land in, there's lots of practice we can do to make you a competent pilot to always be able to land on that spot below you. And so go directly to the field rather than go and try to set up on a downwind or a long final or whatever. It's always better to get over the field and circle down to it. So I did that right, which was great. But it occurred to me after, when the fella on the Unicom didn't offer any sort of help and I had to walk a mile to the FBO to get a ride, that if I died, if I came up short, if I screwed up or I was injured hanging up on a tree a half mile from the airport, nobody would have known I was there because I didn't declare an emergency.
Oh my goodness.
And declaring emergency really doesn't cause any sort of paperwork problems or insurance problems or anything. You should almost, there's no reason I should have declared an emergency immediately. So that's kind of my biggest mistake on this particular one.
Boy, that's a good lesson to have learned on that. Dan Bass, I am so pleased that you reached out again and that we were able to discuss your first situation and this one with the engine issue. And that idea of declaring an emergency is something that is not to be avoided, and they are eager. Air traffic control is eager to help you in any situation like that, and they'll keep a better eye on you.
Absolutely.
Dan Bass, thank you so much for being on the Rider Report.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.
I'm so appreciative of Dan's willingness to share his experiences with us, and I'm also appreciative of how you have shared this podcast with your friends. We're adding listeners every episode, and it's gratifying on multiple levels. Most importantly, that we can learn so much from the experiences of others. It's the reason that AvBrief, Avemco, and I produce this podcast, to help make us all safer pilots. Thanks for joining us for some hangar flying that you can take with you anywhere, anytime. We drop episodes every couple of weeks so you can hear the first-hand accounts of the flying lessons that sometimes only experience can teach. If you've got a story that you'd like to share, here's my email address, rob@avbrief.com. rob@avbrief.com. For Avemco Aviation Insurance and avbrief.com, I'm Rob Ryder. Catch you next time on The Rider Report.